can only imagine when that day comes. Good to see everybody this morning. As you're taking your seat, we want to welcome you. We are steadily working through the Psalms of David. I don't know that we'll do all 150. Nobody's complained to me thus far about going through the Psalms. Never done it this way before, and it's been an enriching study from a personal standpoint. And you get a whole lot of the life and the vibrancy of the faith of the Israelites that were true to God in just taking the Psalms as they come. And they have very human problems. Some of the things that are being dealt with in Psalm 82 is where we're going to begin at verses 3 and 4. The needs of the poor have been neglected, and the psalmist has been moved to the Spirit to write these things down. And God is going to issue judgment. Verses 1 and 2, we learn that. And this is why there's going to be a judgment. As we begin, let's have a word of prayer. Would you bow with me? Our Father, we give Thee thanks for the day. We're thankful for the moderation in temperature today, and I pray that You just be kind and gracious to us. We're grateful for the seasons as they change. That You give us confidence that You are there and are firmly in control. We pray that You bless us in this study, that we would think deeply and make application to ourselves wherein they're evident to us. For this we pray in Jesus' name. Amen. Let me read verse, I'll go back and pick up verses 3 and 4. And I was beginning to look at verse 4. It said, "Vindicate the weak and fatherless. Do justice to the afflicted and destitute. Rescue the weak and the needy. Deliver them out of the hand of the wicked." Now you notice that he didn't say deliver the shiftless and the lazy, the dishonest and underhanded. But he's talking about people that have fallen victim to those that have the power. And usually the gateway to power is what? Money. They got the money to buy the influence, got the money to hire whatever they want done. And some of those individuals, not all of them, but some of those individuals are not at all adverse to stepping on people that they can get by with doing that. And they have been getting by with doing that, but now that's about to come to an end. And the poor needed somebody to deliver them from these unjust and difficult circumstances that surrounded them. And thus the psalmist cries out, rescue the weak and needy, deliver them out of the hand of the wicked. And so they're in a situation, not of their own making, but they're in a situation where it is disadvantageous for a lot of the people. And so the reader is asked to stand up for the passed over folks that do not get noticed, the folks that don't have political connections, don't have the power of wealth, don't have family connections and what have you. And so he is charged to rescue them. Somebody needs to take a stand and to say enough and to rescue them and see that they're delivered from the hand or the power of the wicked. They've been pressed down by misuse of power and by an evil influence that's been placed upon them, and it's coming from the government. Governments, in fact, a lot of governments in the world, for all of the problems ours has, you just need to travel a little bit and get down in Central and South America if you want to see some oppressive governments and what have you. And so some of these things ring very familiar to me. They couldn't get a fair hearing because in their situation, the judiciary had been corrupted and the magistrates were corrupt, insomuch they apparently do not fear God and they don't respect man. And so they lack the compassion that should have characterized those in the seats of authority. You don't want somebody in a seat of authority who's weak and not able to enforce the laws as they're written, but you certainly want somebody that can understand some of the nuances and feel compassion towards those. I don't know all the circumstances around it, but I read an article or part of an article where one of the Supreme Court justices, Judge Gorsuch, had mentioned that in the time that 17 years that he'd been a judge, that he was having people come before him that had broken the law, but but it was apparent that they didn't know they were breaking the law when they did and didn't intend to. And his point was, in his opinion, that just means you're law bound, that you've overdone it. When it gets to where people step off into something because they didn't know, it's confusing and what have you. But that's a different kind of thing. That's inadvertent. That probably wasn't intentional on anybody's part. It's just what we've come out with. But this was intentional. And that lack of compassion in those particular individuals is really, really a thing that needed to be changed. And in their crookedness, they gave a preferential treatment to the rich, surprise, surprise, and to the influential. And while the weak and those that were beaten down by the oppressed were living without hope. I remember when I was growing up, I'd hear some of the adults talking about that, the divvying up of the resources and what have you took place in a cafe. They named the cafe, I don't remember the name of it, but it was at the Four Corners. And said the road commissioners would sit in there together. They'd get together and they just, they divide the goods and services and what have you up, not in an equitable way. Well, I was too young to know what they were talking about or know if that was true or not, but it was true here. It was true here, and the Lord has always been the champion of those who, through no fault of their own, have fallen upon hard times and who have been disadvantaged further by those that should have been on hand to help them. And so when it comes to verses 5 through 7, the statement is, or the point is made that there's not going to be any partiality here. The judge is about to judge the judges. And so you do not want to be one of those that have shown partiality, so they do not know, nor do they understand. They walk about in darkness. All the foundations of the earth are shaken. I said, you are gods. And little g, and all of you are the sons of the Most High. Nevertheless, you'll die like men and fall like any one of the princes. In other words, you're going to make your exit too, bro. And then what? Well, then the judge. Verse 5. God speaks directly to these unfaithful judges, and he describes their character, what's prompted the things that they've done that have offended him. And he says they don't know or understand. They walk about in darkness. All the foundations of the earth are shaken. So they're incompetent. If they don't know or understand, they're incompetent to be where they are. We see that sometimes today, don't we, through societies. You want to get somebody who's competent to be in the position, not somebody who's the brother-in-law of one of the politicians or, that kind of thing, that kind of nepotism. You get enough of that real quick. And so they've walked in darkness, that is a poetic way of saying self-imposed ignorance, until the foundations of the earth are shaking from this lack of discipline and integrity. So that's unsustainable in a situation like what you see in Psalm 82. Sooner or later, that train's going to wreck. And when it does, it's going to be a bad wreck. And so the whole social structure is in disorder, I should say, and is failing to function as God intended for it to. You have to have a society. You have to have a credible judiciary. You have to have banking and financial ways to move wealth around and take care of what you're doing. They're just some basic things. They got to be in place. And if they're not in place, well, then you're going to have a whole lot of disorder, and ultimately it can even lead to warfare. In verse 6, God has given these individuals that he's talking to, he's given them an elevated position. He's advantaged them. And with that advantage, with that position, comes responsibility that they have not carried through with. I said, you are gods, and all of you are the sons of the Most High. God said that he had labeled them as gods, little g. We don't do that, but they did. In the first person personal pronoun, I is the first word in the Hebrew text, and it conveys, because it's up there at the beginning, it conveys intensity, emphasis. And as in Psalm 8, the dignity of man is asserted here. All of you are sons of the Most High. So because the rulers occupy a position superior to the majority of the people, more, not less, is expected of them. They are expected to be of a different caliber than, just a guy on the street hanging out under a shade tree. They're supposed to have academic qualifications, character qualifications, and what have you. So he expects more of them. God had endowed them with dignity and authority. They're children of the Most High, Elion, is what he says, in regard to the rulerships that is given to them. He gave it to them, and they'd been put in this place by the highest of the high. And because of this, they are sons of God. Well, if they misbehave, who does that reflect on? Anybody at home? It reflects on God who put them in a position, doesn't it? And that ought to speak to us. If we're in covenant with God and part of his family, then we may not be in an elevated position, but we are his representatives in this community. And so that means the way I conduct my business, the way I treat the people that I interact with in the community on a regular basis, is going to speak a great deal. And because I have a higher public profile, I've always felt like it's incumbent upon me to be especially careful. But I'm not the only one who ought to be careful, am I? Everybody ought to be. We ought to be careful because of who we represent. And these folks have dropped the ball, and God is going to hold them to account. And regardless, in verse 7 of their elevated station, all these rulers need to understand they too are human. And they're going to face the trials and the difficulties to which humans are heir. We've aired those things. They've come down, not the guilt, but the results of bad decisions down through the years has come down to us. And so it's to them as well. And appropriately, he says to them, nevertheless, you will die like men and fall like any one of the princes. So, because of their flagrant denial and disrespect for this divine trust that he's placed in them, the corrupt officials are just told straight out, you need to remember that you're going to die too. And when all is said and done, payday someday is, like that day. And their office and their rank is not going to excuse them or save them from living and dying like all men do. They would die like the common men, and they would be judged as all other men are. And so that is the thing people ought to take to heart, whether in a position of authority or not. that out there is that time coming where we're going to pillow our head in death and we'll be no more here. And then we come into the presence. What I hope for everyone is into a garden beyond time, to await the second coming of the Lord and consummation of all things. In verse 8, God will judge the earth. Arise, O God, judge the earth, for it is you who possesses all the nations. And that's the thing that, that rulers sometimes appear to me to become kind of full of themselves. And they forget that God is the one that established the governments of men. He's the one that sets them up, and he's also the one, when he sees fit, that takes them down. And that's one thing we need to keep before us. When the righteous judge in heaven arises, then corrupt officials, in this case the judges, cannot refuse to appear in his presence. Or he set a hearing, and it's today. And everybody's going to be there. Judges listen to lots of excuses, that's like school teachers listen to lots of excuses. A story is told of Alexander Campbell, who was a great, great scholar, but he liked to ramble in the woods all his life and look at nature. But his father had sent him out, because everybody was homeschooled then, sent him out and was a French text, and he was having him learn French. And said, literally, he went to sleep sitting under an apple tree, and said an old cow came up and just swallowed that book. At least that's what he told. And so he got home, and his father asked him about it, and he just told him what happened. And he didn't really lose it. Thomas didn't. He just said, well, son, I think that old cow's probably got more French in her belly than you'll ever have in your head. And so they went on, as the story goes. Well, he did master that language, and 2 or 3 others, I think. Arise and judge the earth. The judge of the judges is also judge of all the earth, and he claims every nation is his possession. It belongs to him. And he is petitioned to call his earth to stand before his righteous standards and be measured by them. That's one thing about all of us, is we're given the right to determine, to decide where we spend eternity, right? Here's the will of God revealed. And John 12 and verse 48, Jesus said, the words I have spoken, what? Same shall judge you in the last day. So, I know what he says, and I can choose to do it or not do it, but I'm going to answer for the choice that I make. Arise, O God, the psalmist says, and judge the earth. As the opposite of the word fall in verse 7 is arise in this verse, verse 8, making it partly a request and partly a prediction. God has implored, he has asked to arise and to judge. The prediction that's embodied in this word, judge, may reflect an overtone, a prophetic overtone embedded in the heart of the poem. It asks God to inherit the nations and bring them into control. We get 2 times where it seems that an act of God is needed and necessary in order to set things in order. And when he acts, it can be quite dramatic, quite dramatic. And better for people to function in the capacities that he's given to them and the way that he's directed us. Yes, Bob? Yeah. Yeah, I think that's probably right. And people just kind of absorb what's around them. We, of course, want to be compassionate and concerned about all our people. But sometimes people have pretty unreasonable expectations because they don't know what all is going on. And, of course, when you're sick, who are you focusing on? Yeah, I mean, if you're hurting bad and you feel terrible, you focus on that. And I'm not criticizing that. But then there's a lot of other things. I remember very vividly going to Jackson, Tennessee one night. That's about 25 miles from our home. And we had 2 people to see. And so it went from, I used to know the floor numbers, where a family was at a death watch with an older member of the family, and go down 2 floors to the nursery where a young couple is welcoming a new baby. And to try to get that right, that balance right, is not easy. It's really not easy. We've just always tried to do the best we can where we are and what we got. And that's all you can do. But, yeah, the clergy system, and you've heard our brethren criticize that, and I think rightly so. But then turn right around sometimes in essence practice it, and it works better. God called us to be one people, and He called us into a family relationship. Well, in a family, there's a kind of a distribution of responsibilities and what have you. In other words, and any member of the family, I guess, is sufficient. If it's your brother or your cousin or your sister, and they're there to help you, that's okay. I mean, you're not going to have a certain one out of the family. And so that's just part of life for guys that preach and teach. And I try not to, I don't stray off into that or don't even think about it too much. Just try to do what I can do. Anything else somebody has to say? Psalm 83 is a plea for God to come to the rescue of His people. It is clearly, when we get into it, we'll see there's a time of great national peril. They are in trouble, deep, deep trouble. And a confederacy of nations, 10 nations, according to verses 6 through 8, have committed themselves to destroying Israel. The Jews have made serious mistakes, like all of us have, but I never have really quite understood what the deal is about the Jews. I only knew one Jew, and he was nice to me, and so you got people, I guess I'm just an anachronism. If somebody had done anything to me, I don't even know what we're mad at them about. But it is as it is. Well, they're here in ancient times facing 10 different nations. They're threatening not only to defeat them, but they are threatening to wipe them off, to conduct a genocidal campaign and kill everything that's alive. And so these armies are led by the Moabites, and the Ammonites. And they are long-standing enemies of Israel. Cooperating with them are Edomites, Amalekites, Ishmaelites, Hagarenes, Gebalists, Philistines, Tyre, even the Assyrians. So the time when the psalm was written is really difficult to pin down, if we can at all. The history that we have that's come down to us does not contain an occasion where the nations and tribes mentioned are in a coalition against Israel. One possibility is that is the time when a league of nations came against Jehoshaphat in 2 Chronicles 20. And when you compare those events with this psalm, there are 4 parallels that come up. During the attack, the Moabites and the Ammonites took the leading part and were joined by the Edomites and the Arabians in Second Chronicles 20. And so there's a similarity. Secondly, the aim of their attack corresponds to the purpose mentioned there in verse 4. They intend to do away with them. Thirdly, the glory brought to God as a result of Israel's victory harmonizes with the goal that the psalmist is going to set out in verses 16 through 18 of Psalm 83. And fourthly, and let's see if I can get his name right, Asaphite Levite Jehaziel led the men of Judah to trust God as they prepared for battle. So this could be the link that connects this situation to Asaph. However, 2 Chronicles 20 doesn't mention 7 of the nations at all. The Ishmaelites, the Hagarenes, the Gebalites, the Amalekites, Philistines, Tyre, and Assyrians. Over in 2 Chronicles, they didn't mention those. It could be that those nations joined in as it progressed. You know, people will do that. They'll pile on. They do it in football. They'll do it in a lot of other things. That they jump in if they think they're going to be on the winning side, because the way the people in Hamas acted when they made this last attack, the things that they did, that was what ancient armies did. And they stole everything they took, spoil, and everything wasn't nailed down, they took. And so it could be that those nations just joined in to try to take part in feeding frenzy. It's also possible that the psalm refers to an episode in Israel's history that's just not recorded. It's even possible that the psalmist has combined and made a summary survey of the various forces that have come against Israel within a scope of time. But looking at the totality of their trials, he could be saying, Lord, look at these attacks from the enemies that are surrounding us, which we've had to face and are now facing. Look at it. And then he's going to go on and ask for help. Now, one truth is evident. The psalm, as a national lament, pleads with the Lord for his help. You know, we sometimes are having a real high time, but whenever it gets bad, who do we talk to? Drive you to your knees. That's okay. That's all right. He wants to hear from us. But, you know, we begin to think about it much more acutely. So the writer lifts up a passionate appeal to God in behalf of the Israelites in a time of great danger. We'll see that the psalm also has an element of imprecation. That is, he's asking God to come down and visit his justice upon these people. And he doesn't beat around the bush about it. They have earned it. They've put themselves, arrayed themselves as enemies of God and his people. And so they ask him to deal with them. For us, this writer illustrates what should be done about sin. In the growth of evil, enemies of the Lord eventually became one with sin, as was the case with these conspirators. And so the wicked have made their choices, and they've cast their lot. And so in their pursuit of evil, they had become so united with evil that they had to share the guilt and the fate of evil. And we had here a few years ago, you know, when they had a bunch of riots and stuff, cops killed a man in their custody. That was a sad thing that happened. I don't know all the details of it. But I do know that there were billions of dollars worth of other people's property that folks, because they were mad, burnt to the ground. Now, I don't have the right to be mad at Jerry and go over and burn Herschel's barn down. And what kind of thinking is that? People certainly have a right to express their outrage, but you have to have that within perimeters, do you not? And maintain some sort of civility, because if you don't, what you're going to come out with is anarchy, and nobody wants anarchy. You got a bunch of these little weenie arm guys running around with a big A on their shirt. He's an anarchist. Real anarchists will eat his liver. Nobody wants that. That's a kind of savagery nobody wants to even think about. Well, so we have a time where there's difficulty, great peril to God's people. Verses 1-4. He urges the Lord, don't remain quiet. O God, do not remain quiet. Do not be silent. And, O God, do not be still. For behold, your enemies make an uproar, and those who hate you have exalted themselves. They make shrewd plans against your people and conspire together against your treasured ones. They have said, come and let us wipe them out as a nation, that the name of Israel be remembered no more. And so that is a perilous situation. And the supplication of the psalm is offered as a national prayer. And he begins with a request that God would just come immediately to the aid of his people without delay. The catastrophe is imminent. It's pressing down upon them. And the crisis has arrived. And so the nation that God loves is surrounded by determined adversaries and foes that not only don't respect his people, they don't respect God. And if his people are to be saved, the psalmist is saying, you can't be still, Lord. We can't handle it. We're unable to cope with this. And so he must act immediately in their behalf if he wants them to continue, at least from that psalmist standpoint. And so the writer addresses God in two ways. He cries, O God, Elohim, and referring to God in the plural of majesty. And he further pleads, O God, El, the Almighty One. Quiet, still, silent are synonymous with being inactive. And he's urging the Lord, don't do any of those. The first word is a word that can be translated to rest. The last two are different forms of verbs that can mean be silent. Don't rest, don't be silent. So in the three words, there are negative ways of asking God to help the people. Do not rest. Do not be silent. Do not be still or quiet. He wants him to rise up. The enemies, verse 2, have become aroused, and they're coming against God's people, and they're coming quick. He says, for behold, your enemies make an uproar, and those who hate you have exalted themselves. They've talked themselves into a battle rage, into a frenzy. And when it gets like that, higher level thinking is gone. And you're dealing with some very dangerous people. And so they're moving toward Israel aggressively, at a swift pace, because they intend to carry out the plans that they've made. And like the waves of the sea, they seem to roar and foam. Having grown up where I did, when the sea gets tempestuous, there's no sound quite like that. And when an army on the offense is worked up into a battle rage, there's a roar like nothing that you've ever heard or ever want to hear. They've lifted up their heads, as the Hebrew says, in pride, arrogance, vain confidence. And their vanity is revealed in their insistence that they can make short work of Israel. They're not worried about Israel, and they're not worried about the God of Israel. They feel like they're able to handle that, and then some. In verse 3, they are so intent on attacking the Israelites that they're sitting in war council, working out their strategies of attack. And the writers says they make shrewd plans against your people and conspire together against your treasured ones. And so in these cunning, malignant meetings, war councils, they formulate just what all they're going to do and just how they're going to cloud up and rain all over these Jews. We're going to do this and we're going to do that. And chest beating going on and all that kind of stuff. It's kind of, I guess you might say it's an adult version of middle school boys on the playground trying to talk themselves up into being courageous enough to take a swing. You see them like that sometimes. They're puffed up and they're talking tall. And hopefully neither one of them will do anything silly and get in trouble. But every once in a while, if they got some of their friends, and you have to kind of put that in quotes, egging it up. Only scrap I remember Tiny ever getting in, other than protecting other people, was some of the guys got together, and there was a boy whose desire was to be the world super heavyweight weightlifting champion, and he looked the part. And then Tiny was just a big old German, and they thought that'd really be an interesting scrap, and so they talked those two into running together. Well, thankfully nobody was seriously hurt, but Tiny, after that remark, that he'd played the fool, letting himself get, he wasn't mad at Mark about anything. Mark wasn't mad at him. They just agged it up. People will do that on a national scale, won't they? Antagonize and try to stir up problems. And we've had people in this country that are agitators who try to keep all of us stirred up at each other. Yeah, and we don't need to play that game. One Lord, one faith, one baptism, one God and Father of all, who's in all, through and through all. We need to be going to that direction and not dividing up into warring tribes. But here they are, and what a mess they've got. They're taking aim. These people dare to take aim at God's treasured ones, His hidden ones, those who are under His protection and His grace. He has hidden His servants, putting them away for safekeeping. And the hiding away of His people calls to mind Psalm 27 and verse 5, which says, "For in the day of trouble, He will conceal me in His tabernacle. In the secret place of His tent, He will hide me. He will lift me up on a rock." In other words, He's going to personally protect His folks. In verse 4, they've resolved to destroy the Israelites, and they say to one another, "Come, let us wipe them out as a nation, that the name of Israel be remembered no more." They're not going to stop, and they're not going to stop until they have removed them from the earth. And so they wanted to so deal with Israel that the term Israelite was no longer remembered by anyone. Yes? Yeah. Yeah. I mean, what do you think you're going to do? What do you think you're going to do? And see, the Persians, which are the Iranians, I don't have any beef with the Iranians, but that current regime that's in there, they vow that they're going to destroy from the earth the nation that calls itself Israel today. Now, they're not, they didn't haven't accepted the Messiah. And so that covenant is no longer operative. But it's the same ethnic group of people from the 12 original tribes. And of course, I don't care if they were that or not. To try to wipe out a whole people is not, it occurs to me, a very noble thing to do. If God put them here, He must have some reason for I just figure it's not my place to go around deciding who lives and who dies. And, looks to me like the Lord's already decided a lot of that. And he's able to handle it. I trust him. And so, but that's it. They got hate in their heart. They got murder on their mind, blood in their eye. Verse 5 through 8, for they have conspired together with one mind against you. They make a covenant. The tents of Edom and the Ishmaelites, Moab and the Hagarites, Gebal and Ammon and Amalek, Philistia, the inhabitants of Tyre, Assyria, also join with them. They have become a help to the children of Lot. Selah. He talks about the city of Tyre. Where is that today? What modern country is that? It was kind of a country. Tyre and Sidon. I heard a news reporter call it Sidon, something like that. And I don't know how they pronounce it, but and I don't know if anybody knows how the ancients pronounce it, but it's present-day Lebanon. It's where Tyre and Sidon are. And so these places have been there since Buckus calf. The 10 nations have united. They've made a pact of destruction and bound themselves together that they're going to do this. They've conspired with one mind against you. They make a covenant. So they have come not only to pit themselves against Israel, but they've also made a covenant against God. That one's a hard one for me to grasp because of the view that I entertain of Jehovah. I don't know how a man, any man, or group of men could allow themselves to think that they could ever dare to challenge the Creator. But these did. They were that arrogant. And their strength is seen in their numbers and their unity and their thought out plans. I mean, they're together on what they want to do. And they stood with one mind against God. Well, they're still overmatched. And who are these enemies? Well, the tents of Edom, Ishmaelites, Moab, and Hagarites. The Edomites from the southeast were descendants of Esau. Genesis 36. Their tents refers to their nomadic ways. They move about. The Ishmaelites were descendants, of course, of Ishmael, the handmaiden of Sarah, that Abraham had Ishmael with, Genesis 16, 15, and 16. The Moabites, together with the Ammonites, were descendants of Lot. Genesis 19, 36 through 38. The Hagarites, also known as Hagarenes, is the way I pronounce that, descendants of Hagar, and they were a nomadic tribe, and they lived out to the east of the Jordan and Gilead. Gebal and Ammon and Amalek, Philistia with the inhabitants of Tyre, verse 7. A place called Gebal, north of Tyre, is mentioned in Ezekiel 27 and verse 9, if that's the same one. And another one existed in the northern part of the mountains of Edom and was known as Gebalim. Perhaps the latter one has been referred to here. The people of Amalek were a wandering tribe who had descended from Esau, according to Genesis 36. The Philistines, referred here as Philistia, were well-known Phoenician enemies of Israel during the days of Samuel and David. They came from the sea. The Gaza Strip, if I'm not mistaken, is roughly the territory of Philistia. And so today, still got a problem. Same piece of ground. You still got a problem up in what we call Lebanon. Well, they did too in ancient times. That's an ancient name. Still got some of the same people fighting each other. Assyria, he said, has also joined them, and they have become a help to the children of Lot. Selah. Ashur is the Hebrew word that stands for Assyria, and it's one that's used here. The nation became a help, an arm, the Hebrew says, to the children of Lot. In Deuteronomy 2, verse 9, the Moabites and the Ammonites were who they became allied with. The Assyrians were the dominant power, the dominant empire from the mid-8th century BC until the mid-7th century BC. They didn't last long, but they were absolutely dominant and fearful for the century or so that they were dominant. The fact that Assyria is mentioned as supporting the Moabites and the Ammonites is indication that they weren't a world-dominating power at that point, and probably indicates an early time for the writing of the song. These nations and tribes had joined forces, as we've been saying, to destroy Israel and remove her name from the earth. They wanted no mention. Whenever somebody takes over another place, what do? About statues and historical markers and what have you. Ever noticed? They go tearing it down. Then they put up something different. Well, the history is the history. I don't know how you feel about it, but the history is the history. And so I say leave it and tell the truth about it. Just tell the truth, whatever happened. But that's not typically what happens. They want to tear it all down and have no mention of it, try to wipe it out, everybody forget about it. But those things have a way of reasserting themselves. These nations and the tribes joined forces to bring about utter destruction. And they didn't want the painful memory of Yahweh among them. He had given victories to Israel in the past, and they wanted to avenge that. And the writer reminds us that nothing is more appropriate when we are surrounded by evil than to call on the Lord. The psalmist knew exactly who to go to, didn't he? And he has the wisdom. God has the wisdom to provide the help needed. And he alone has the strength to achieve victory over our foes. We look at the world situation, and people try to keep us scared all the time, upset all the time, and the Chinese are ascendant, and they are an aggressive power. They're the communist power. They are pretty tyrannical in the way that they treat their own people. And the Russians, of course, have been the big booger since I was a little kid, But the fact is, they look kind of like a lot of us. Don't tell anybody, But that's been the Russian bear. We were told. I expected them to have horns or something, But they are tough people. But my point about bringing those current world powerful nations up is they're no challenge to God any more than this one is. This country's no challenge to God. I don't care how many missiles you got and all that. You don't want to array yourself against the Lord, and you don't want Him to decide, now's the time that these people who've been advantaged are going to have some discipline applied to them. And when you look around at what He's given to us for 200 years, 250 years or so, and look at the way He's been treated and His laws being disregarded, it should sober everybody. And it should motivate us. Preach the Word. Be instant in season, out of season, reprove, rebuke, and exhort with all patience and teaching. Thank you for being here this morning.